Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping straight into a truly wild piece of historical convergence today. From Columbus to the Cossacks, the origins of Ukraine. We're going to see how a massive global discovery crashed right into a local eastern borderland to forge a completely new national identity. So, let's start here. The year 7000. Now, according to the Orthodox calendar back then, the world was literally scheduled to end in this exact year. People were absolutely convinced time was up. The logic? Well, God created the world in 6 days, rested on the seventh, and since one divine day equaled 1,000 human years, hitting year 7000 meant hitting the definitive end of the line. But here's where the historical timelines get super fascinating. Because of a massive 5,508-year gap in how they track time, that apocalyptic Orthodox year of 7000 translated exactly to the Catholic year of 1492. See, the Orthodox world calculated time all the way from the creation of the world, while the Catholic calendar started at the birth of Christ. So you have these two massive spheres of influence looking at the exact same moment in time, both carrying this heavy, impending sense of world-ending dread.
Which brings us to part 1, the year the world ended, apocalyptic signs of 1492.
You have to understand, people weren't just guessing the apocalypse was coming. They felt they were literally watching the signs play out right in front of them. Deep anxiety was gripping the Orthodox world. They believed that right before the end, the Antichrist would descend. And to them, the absolute clearest sign that he had arrived was the Muslim conquest of Constantinople. As the capital of Christianity, it was supposed to stand until the end of time. When it fell, the Orthodox scribes didn't even bother extending the church calendar past the year 7000. They confidently wrote it would just be filled with terror, grief, and great misfortune. For them, time was up.
And over in the Catholic world, they were totally on edge too. They mourned the fall of Constantinople, sure, but they had their own crazy internal crises. That same year, Pope Alexander VI, from the infamous Borgia family, took the papal throne. His name was so tied to corruption and debauchery that a lot of people thought the Antichrist had seized not just Constantinople, but Rome itself. It wasn't entirely doom and gloom, though. At the start of 1492, the Catholic world did celebrate the end of the Reconquista in Spain, finally expelling the Arabs and capturing Granada after centuries of fighting.
Moving on to part 2, A Tale of Two Worlds. 1492 redraws the global map.
Obviously, 1492 did not bring the end of the world. Instead, it kicked off the dramatic, chaotic beginning of a globally connected era, with two very distinct worlds playing out at the exact same time. Over in the West, you've got Christopher Columbus, an Italian captain funded by Spain, trying to find a sea route to India to bypass the Muslim blockade. Instead, he blindly discovers the Americas. That mistake essentially launches globalization. Meanwhile, in the eastern part of Europe, a local tribe of Cossacks from Kiev and Cherkasy is hanging out in the lower reaches of the Dnieper River. That very same year, they captured and destroyed a Turkish ship. The complaint filed by the Crimean Khan about this event? It's the very first historical mention of the Zaporozhian Cossacks. Two totally disconnected worlds laying the foundations for our modern map.
But those two disconnected worlds didn't stay apart for long. As the centuries rolled by, globalization meant Columbus's world eventually reached the steps of the Cossacks. Products from the Americas, especially tobacco, became absolute staples in the East. This gets so deeply baked into the culture that a famous Cossack folk song actually praises their leader, Hetman Saha-Dachny, with the lyrics, "Who traded his wife for tobacco and a pipe." Just incredible, right? Globalization had truly arrived.
Now let's look at part 3, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, an oasis of stability.
So all of this builds into a massive geopolitical melting pot that housed both of these influences. Formed in 1569, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth united the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. What makes this state so incredibly unique is that it brought the world of Columbus, Western Christian civilization, and the Orthodox world of the Cossacks under one single border. It was famously this oasis of stability. While brutal religious wars were literally tearing Western Europe apart, the Commonwealth was amazingly tolerant. It offered a sanctuary where Eastern and Western Christians lived side by side in roughly equal numbers, and it became a haven for Jews, Protestants, Muslims, and other groups expelled from neighboring countries. If you want to grasp the sheer scale of this diversity, just look at its largest eastern city, Lviv. By the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries, the population of the Rus lands was even more diverse than central Poland. You had at least 5 distinct ethnic and religious groups: the Rus, Germans, Poles, Jews, and Armenians.
and each one made up over 5% of the local population. Historians actually note that almost no other city in all of Europe could match Lviv's astonishing diversity at the time.
And this wild mix of fugitive peasants, religious dissidents, adventurers, and rebellious Cossacks absolutely thrived in what was called the Kresy, the eastern borderlands. As a general rule of history, peripheries and borderlands are inherently zones of increased creativity. When you force completely different, multi-ethnic cultures to rub shoulders, that friction, whether it's peaceful or hostile, always sparks massive societal evolution.
The whole dynamic is captured perfectly by Józef Pilsudski, who was actually a product of the Kresy himself. He famously compared the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to a bagel, a big hole in the middle, with all the good stuff around the outside. Think about that. The borderlands were where the real historical action, the vital creative energy, was actually taking place.
Which leads us perfectly into Part 4, the birth of Ukrainian identity, the West in Polish garb.
Out of this incredibly creative, chaotic borderland emerged the very framework for a modern national identity. See, because the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth united most of the Ukrainian ethnic territory under one state, it acted as a massive cultural mediator. The concept of a nation was largely an English prototype spreading across Europe at the time. By the end of the 15th century, modern Western European nations were forming, but the Orthodox Rus found themselves kind of stuck between them. So the transformation of the Orthodox Rus into the Ukrainian nation happened directly because these Western Christian ideas were actively pushing eastward.
As historian Ihor Shevchenko brilliantly summarized, these Western concepts of nationhood and modernization absolutely reached Ukraine. But because they passed through the mediator of the Commonwealth, they were, for the most part, dressed up in the kontus, which is Polish cultural clothing. The West met the East, but it arrived wrapped in this highly unique, Polish, multi-ethnic borderland package.
So we started with people literally terrified the world was ending in 1492. Instead, we got the birth of globalization and the forging of a completely new identity in the East. Knowing that nations are born from these vibrant, chaotic cultural collisions, we have to ask ourselves, how does the legacy of the 16th century borderland, this massive clash between the world of Columbus and the world of the Cossacks, continue to define our global map right now? Think about how these historical intersections are still playing out in today's geopolitics. It's a lot to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep exploring the deep roots of our global history.